Okay, hi. So let us quickly finish with Byron. I'll do Canto for today, the excerpt which is given in our syllabus, and this sure is going to be a much shorter discussion. Uh, we are familiar with some of the themes that Byron is talking about in the previous Canto. Uh, History, man, the limitations of man in the face of history, mortal time, etc., etc. In this canto, you'll find uh, a lot more focus on what could be the alternative to man's uh, limited existence. In a sense, if history, political pursuits, and great endeavors are uh, are in or rather unfulfilling and ultimately end up to be uh, futile uh, to man's progress, journey, pilgrimage. Here it is going to be compensated with an understanding of the self, a better understanding of the self. Uh, Also, the poetic exercise or the poet's pilgrimage, uh, which takes the reader to a certain understanding of things by virtue of traversing or traveling this course of the poem, the narrative of the poem, in a sense that uh, on a larger philosophical point, what Byron says in Canto 4 is that uh, it is a knowledge of uh, man's relationship with nature, which is arrived at after this pilgrimage, and man, in a sense, uh, enters into a communion with nature, enters into a conversation with nature in this pilgrimage, and it gives an understanding to man about what he is, in a sense. Where is he positioned in his relationship with uh, earthly time or secular time or historical time, and the permanence of nature, so man's temporality and nature's permanence. That is a key theme in this canto as well. Okay, and again keep a note of the paradox, the use of paradox in Byron's poetry. Begins, there is a pleasure in the pathless woods, there is a rapture on the lonely shore, there is society where none intrudes by the deep sea, and music in its roar. Okay, pleasure in pathless woods. The pleasure in woods or uh, pathless woods would be the woods of life, not literally the woods, the forest, but also the woods of life, the jungle or the forest of life, in which you travel on a path which is unique, which is not trodden, a beaten path, which is not trodden by uh, um, the popular mm, routine kind of a life, a routine kind of experience of the world. So again, you see this exclusive nature of the journey or the pilgrimage undertaken by the poetic self uh, in this poem, which is pointed at. There is a rapture on the lonely shore. Rapture is again a very uh, uh, a religious kind of an experience. The remember the kind of experience Shelley talks about, the ecstasy of finding something, almost in a very religious kind of a way, but it is not related to Christianity or the church or the realization of God at all. It is of a very secular nature, which has nothing to do with the Christian God or the religious uh, um, um, the religious intimation of the divine in that sense. Okay, so there is a pleasure in the pathless woods. There is a rapture on the lonely shore, again lonely. So the isolated singular romantic self, or the romantic hero who goes on a journey, a pilgrimage, and it's a journey of self-discovery. And how self-discovery? Through engagement with different facets of the world, by traversing a path which is not beaten by custom, by certain stereotypes of culture. There is society where none intrudes. So in isolation, there is company for this romantic self, the pilgrim, in this case, the poet persona, and society of whom? Not people, society of nature. There is society where none intrudes by the deep sea, and music in its roar. I love not man the less, but nature more. Okay, this is a very Rousseauian kind of an idea. Okay, that nature, in a sense, um, has a lot more in store for you to learn from, to enrich your imagination and yourself with, as opposed to the society of man, because it becomes routine and it corrupts you. From these are interviews, interactions with nature. From these our interviews, in which I steal from all I may be or have been before, to mingle with the universe and feel what I can never express yet cannot all conceal. So what is he saying? That in his communion with nature, interaction with nature, he is able to steal away from what he may be, what he might be in future, or have been before. So during his communion with nature, he is not concerned about either his past or his future. He is able to stay in the moment. Okay, and it is the ability to stay in the moment in communion with nature without thinking about the past or the future, and being in the present. And in this present, what is he doing? He's contemplating about his own relationship with himself and the world and nature. uh, to mingle with the universe and feel what I can never express. So he feels something which is too deep for words to express, too profound, and yet he cannot really quite conceal it because it is a powerful experience. Okay, so keep all these ideas in mind. This kind of a paradox of finding company in isolation because there is a company of nature, uh, uh, realizing something very deep for which he has no words adequate enough. So again, that gap between the experience, the deep experience, and the limitation of words to explain that. Okay, between the word and the meaning, between the poetic expression and the feeling at the real human level. All right, and yet, in a sense, what the poems comes out to be, and yet what he cannot conceal, because he said something about that experience. That is the poem. Okay, it's not quite exactly what he felt, but a part of it. Okay, and also keep in mind that he is thinking about himself in the present moment. How? As what? As a meditating, contemplative person. Okay, as an intellectual, philosophic mind which can contemplate upon his meaning, on the meaning of life, etc., etc., and not of what he has been before, as, in a sense, whatever his identity was, and what he may be in future, in society, in culture, or in stature, etc. And as we have seen various romantic poets using different phenomena of nature as key propellers of their thought. In Shelley, it was the west wind. In Wordsworth, it was something else. In Ode to Dejection, it was the moon and the Again, the wind, sometimes the season, the autumn. For Keats, the nightingale or something of that sort is there, and always some phenomena of nature is there. In Byron's case, here it is the ocean. Now, why this ocean? You'll find in all or many great epic poems and adventure tales, etc., that the ocean often becomes a symbol of unlimiting or unlimited experiences because it is endless. The ocean keeps renewing itself, the cycle of water, which we all know. Uh, and imagine yourself in the 17th century, 16th century, or whatever. The ocean is that space which is boundless, can't really go to the very deep depths of the ocean. There were not scuba divers or submarines like that which we have now. We can go to the ocean floor, and there is no GPS to navigate the ocean. There is no fixed roads. There are no signboards on the ocean. There are pirates. There are sea creatures, whales, and all sorts of perils, dangers, which make the journey risky, adventurous, and a lucrative venture. Uh, it's a sea route or it's a trade route. It is sometimes the borders of an empire, the ocean shore. Sometimes it is uh, uh, a path to discovery of a new land. So the ocean figures as a very prominent natural phenomena in a lot of poems, and for Byron is deliberately using or evoking the ocean in that manner. Okay, and that, hence it becomes a limitless site for contemplation and meditation upon the self, and the renewal of the self and its relationship with existence and time and so on and so forth. Okay. He says, roll on, thou deep dark blue ocean, roll. 10,000 fleets sweep over thee in vain. Note all the markers of human civilization in contrast to the permanent body of nature, the ocean. 10,000 fleets sweep over thee in vain. There is no use. Man marks the earth with ruin. Remember, the poem is written in the context of the Napoleonic Wars, the French post-French Revolution period, where Europe was seeing a lot of political turmoil. Okay, man marks the earth, so it can mark the earth. There is a boundary that you can make on the earth with ruin. Wars ultimately we make. Why are wars fought? To redefine boundaries, to make new boundaries. All right, and it brings along a lot of ruin. So that's why he's using this expression: man marks the earth with ruin. His control stops with the shore. He cannot mark territory on the ocean. Upon the watery plain, the wrecks are all thy deed. Whatever wrecks are caused on the ocean, it is caused by you. That is the ocean. Okay, its own powers, waves. Nor does remain a shadow of man's ravage. Nothing that man does on the space of the ocean remains. Everything would get drowned. On earth you can mark territory, build monuments, etc., etc. Okay, but not on the surface of the ocean. The wrecks are all thy deed, nor does remain a shadow of man's ravage, save his own, except his own ravage and ruin. When for a moment, like a drop of rain, he sinks into thy depths with bubbling groan, without a grave, unknelled, uncoffined, and unknown. Okay, he's again referring to the great destruction of human lives that was caused by the Napoleonic Wars, and many a soldier would have died a death of anonymity, and ultimately, you commemorate uh, death of valiant soldiers, etc. But how many would do that for the thousands and lakhs of soldiers who would have been killed in the times of the Iliad or the Odyssey or the Indian epic, or uh, even say 15th century, 16th century. We know about the kings and the ministers and so on and so forth, but not quite the numberless soldiers who are killed in war and battle. So he's talking about, so he's using that idea and transferring it onto the figure of man drowning in an ocean. Okay. Uh, uh, on the ocean, it is immediate. If on land you might have made a grave for a soldier who died in a crusade in the 13th, 14th century, you would have forgotten that soldier after a little while, after a few years, 100 years, 200 years, whatever. But on the ocean, it is immediate. You cannot mark really a grave on the ocean if you die drowning there. Okay. So it's an interesting way where in which Byron, uh, in a sense, transposes the anonymity of death after history has run its course. So after time you'll forget, no matter how historic it is. On the ocean, it will happen immediately. Ocean is merciless in that sense. It will not mark your grave, give you anything to uh, uh, commemorate your great victories on, etc. It's only what can it mark? That man, the ruin of a man, in a sense. The very act, the very fact of the drowning of soldiers, of fleets, it is marked in that sense, but not in an exact place which you can commemorate. Okay. His steps are not thy path. Again, his is personifying the ocean. By now, it should be very easy for us to identify that. His steps are not upon thy paths. That is, man's steps are not on your paths. Thy fields, again, the ocean's expanse, are not a spoil for him. He cannot conquer the ocean land. Though you arise and shake him from thee, the while strength he wields over for earth's destruction, thou do all despise, spurning him from thy bosom to the skies. It's just imagine it as a scene of a ship, a storm, and a sailor on a ship being tossed and turned and thrown up by the gust of waves and winds on a stormy sea, on a stormy ocean. Okay, it's that kind of an imagery is there. And send him shivering in thy playful spray and howling to his gods, where perhaps lies his petty hope in some near port or bay, and dash him again to earth, where there let him lay. So this is what the ocean does to man. Okay, throws him up, and the man is at the mercy of the waves of the ocean into the sea, and the body, or somehow the man swims and escapes to some shore where he probably hopes to reach and find some sort of help. So ocean is merciless in that sense, and throws man off its chest in anger, and the man is left to fend for his own self, and ocean is not coming to its rescue. It's also a metaphorical, symbolical way of talking about uh, the lack of certainty which is there on a sea voyage, and by that fact in any sort of historical battle expedition, because you can be cast off. Well, if in the previous canto we've talked about Napoleon, how fate in a sense uh, uh, deserts him when he's become too arrogant. So, how man is at the mercy of the forces of nature, of eternal time, of the eternal forces which are beyond his control. And that is a key feature of romantic poetry, to expose you, or rather to expose the limitations of man and alert you about the limitations of man, as opposed to man and man's limited ideas of culture, societies, as opposed to permanent ideas of nature. And then he goes on to give you a more, the above stanza was a more generalized view of all of this. Okay, the conflicts. The next stanza is a more particular, next two in fact, are more particular and focused, giving you an overview of ancient historical civilizations, battles, and contemporary battles, the Napoleonic Wars, and showing you how, if those ancient battles and civilizations came to mean nothing with the passage of time, and only thing that remained was not an empire, not an army, not a great leader, savior, but what remained was the permanent site of the European waters, the oceans on which those battles were fought, on the lands on which empires were built. So something of a kind of sense which was evoked in Ozymandias by Shelley. Okay, so read the next two stanzas with this sort of an idea in mind. Okay, and there is a deliberate attempt to connect the ancient past to the contemporary times and show how empires come and go, great ships and navies come and go, but what remains is nature, the ocean. Okay, in the next stanza, he talks about the armaments which thunder strike the walls, the ammunition he's talking about, of rock built cities, bidding nations quake and monarchs tremble in their capitals, talking about the wars which are happening in the empires, castles being stormed and hit with cannons and ammunition. That's the imagery. The oak leviathans, the large ships, navy ships, whose huge ribs make their clay creator the vain title take of Lord of Thee. I mean, he's mocking great navy generals and sailors who, in a sense, think of themselves as rulers of the ocean just because they have a big navy contingent and ships, battleships, an arbiter of war. So these are all the titles: Lord of the ship, Lord, or great warriors that human beings take the titles. He says all of these are toys for you, and they are like the snowflake which melt into the yeast of waves. So snowflake falling into the waves, it just melt and vanish, which mar alike the armadas prized or spoils of Trafalgar. So this is a reference to that. It says that your waves are equally destructive of whether they be the ships of the Spanish Armada of the 16th century, the note will tell you, or the armies at the Battle of Trafalgar, which is in 1805. So these 225-30 years is a period in which he is citing these two examples on the either side of those 200 years and saying that all would melt into you, the permanent ocean. Okay. And it's a very strong image of human aspects of the human civilization and human beings themselves, in a sense, being snowflakes which are absorbed, or in a sense mingled with by the ocean. Okay. Thy shores are empires, change in all save thee. Okay. Your shores are empires, in a sense they are marked as empires, which keep changing except in the reality of you, which continue to exist permanently. Assyria, Greece, Rome, Carthage, all great ancient Middle Eastern even civilizations. Uh, what are they? Thy waters washed them power while they were free, and many a tyrant since. So your waters, in a sense, uh, uh, were used as powers by these great empires, because I mean all these great empires would have navies, fleets of navy, and they would use the ocean as a means to expand their empires and wage wars and battles. Their shores obey the stranger, slave, or savage. Their decay has dried up realms to desert. So he's talking about all the great empires which have now become nothing. Not so thou. Okay. The great empires which were great in the past, and they would quash or thump down the stranger, the slave, or the savage in their times. Okay. But now their shores obey the stranger, so anybody can come to the empire, and people who were once forbidden rather to enter into an empire can now freely come and go. The slave uh, or the savage. So in a sense, the ocean's shores are neutral to the forces of human power and power struggles and this hierarchy of who is powerful and weak, who should be the master or the slave, who should be the imperial ruler or civilizational, or rather, when he says the stranger, the slave, and the savage can claim the shores of the ocean, which were once the shores of empires. He is saying that the ocean does not care for who is native to a land or who is a stranger, or civilized or savage, or master, imperial power, or the Negro slave or the black slave. Okay, for the ocean, everybody is equal. They obey all these supposedly subjugated people by the back empires back then. They obey the shores of nature, obey them equally. Their decay has dried up realms to deserts. Now their decay is talking about the decay of the empires. Has dried up realms to deserts. The huge realms of empire have become desert by now. Again, Ozymandias. Not so thou, not in your case. Unchangeable save as the wild waves play. So your empire, the ocean, is not changed. Okay, except you. Everything else has changed, and nothing has changed you except your waves which play. In a sense, the waves are not unidimensional or constant all throughout. They keep stopping and changing. However, the empire of the ocean remains intact. Okay, so in a way, it's a very interesting sort of an image. I had not thought of it before. It just come to my mind that when he says the image of the unchangeable ocean, and yet at the same time its waves keep playing and changing constantly. So can it be read as a means, or can it be read as Byron talking about the fact that nature survives because or nature remains permanent because it has the element of constant change, adjustment, renewal is a permanent feature of the forces of nature. Okay, whereas and it's interesting that he's talking about that in a stanza which is about empires. Empires are usually built on exclusivist and exceptionalist claims, that, see, my empire is exclusive, it is exceptional, and the purity of its race, the purity of its religion, the purity of its language, the purity of the royal lineage should remain unchanged, should remain uh, intact, should remain unaltered, unadulterated, the pure race. So this kind of an idea. However, when you talk about different phenomena of nature, especially the ocean, uh, nature has its inbuilt, the very identity of nature and its permanent is because of the fact that it constantly renews itself, changes, adjusts. Okay, as opposed to human civilization and empires, which thrive on exclusion and exceptionalism and do not want to adjust and change, and hence over a period of time die out. Okay, there's a big great lesson there. uh, okay, and he says that time writes no wrinkle on thine azure brow, uh, no anxiety or worry or even aging in that sense. Such as creation's dawn beheld, thou rollest on. So, as from the beginning of time, you continue to roll on as you had rolled when Earth began, in that sense. So, it's permanence. Although, if Byron would have known about climate change, he would have perhaps thought differently. The phenomena of nature and the very nature of nature, quote unquote, has changed significantly ever since, as we probably would have uh, uh, paid attention to when our seminar happened on climate change. And he calls nature the glorious mirror where the Almighty's form glasses itself in tempest. So he calls nature the glorious mirror, a surface which reflects a mirror. What is reflected there? The Almighty's form, the divine. Okay, now he's not used the word God, he's not used the word Christ or any religious God in that sense. He's just talking about the almighty power of creation. Okay, although this idea about religion is not really that central to these cantos per se, except of, or rather it is in that sense, I would correct myself, because it is called Childe Harold's Pilgrimage and we discussed in the other lecture. So it's more of that divine force of nature which is addressing as the Almighty. The glorious mirror where the Almighty's form glasses itself in tempest. Glasses, in a sense, mirrors or shows itself in the form of storms. In all time, calm or convulsed. So in all sorts of time, the reflection of the Almighty Divine is there in nature, whether calm or convulsed, in breeze or gale or storm, icing the pole, the North Pole ice caps, or in the torrid climb dark heaving, or the dark stormy torrid climates. Boundless, eternal, sublime. This is the ocean. Boundless, can't mark the territory. Again, remember Kubla Khan, the tyrant wanting to encircle uh, nature and exclude all the negatives and have all this pleasure dome, etc. So this nature is boundless, it is endless. Geographically, in a sense, it is, I mean, it's actually, we can map and mark it, but practically impossible back then. Endless, unending, timeless. Again, by that time, nobody would have thought about that the oceans can dry up, like they might if we continue the way we do. And sublime, something that evokes again terror and beauty. So the ocean is terrifying because it's fathomless, unknown. Remember Burke, and it is beautiful, it is powerful, it is awesome in that sense, awe-inspiring. Okay, the image of eternity. So that is the Almighty's form, the image of eternity. Eternity is Almighty. Timelessness, permanence, exhibited in nature is Almighty. So It is called the Almighty's form, or rather the glorious mirror which reflects the Almighty's form. It is called the image of eternity, the throne of the invisible, again the ocean. Even from out thy slime, the monsters of the deep are made. Uh, that is the myths about the sea creatures, etc., which are made out of the mud of the seabeds. Each zone obeys thee, thou goest forth, dread, fathomless, alone. Something almost in tune with what the poet's pilgrimage has been about, or the nature of the nature with a small n, not the capital N. The nature of the poet's pilgrimage, Childe Harold's pilgrimage, has been of this sort, going forth, fathomless, alone, etc. Okay. And he says, and I love the ocean, and my joy of youthful sports was on thy breast to be borne like thy bubbles. So this was his joy. And again, think back of P.B. Shelley, Ode to the West Wind, of Wordsworth, of Coleridge, Ode to Intimation, as the note says. And also, it doesn't say P.B. Shelley, but you can add to it. And my joy, he says, of youthful years when he was younger, of youthful sports, was on thy breast to be borne thy like thy bubble. So be almost as an element of, or a part of the oceanic force, or the force of nature. Be an instrument of it, or be a small portion of that fathomless, limitless power, nature. Borne like thy bubbles onward, thy ocean's bubbles. From a boy, I vented with thy breakers. Breakers are that rising sea waves. So when you're moving ahead, they work as speed breakers. So he's talking about that. They to me were a delight. So any obstacles which the ocean threw in his onward journey, forward journey, were like a delight to him, because it was coming from nature. And if the freshening sea made them a terror, the rising fresh waters of the sea after a rain, most probably, it was a pleasing fear. For I was, as it were, a child of thee, and trusted to thy billows far and near, and laid my hand upon thy mane as I do here. It's a gesture, it's a very uh, intimate kind of a gesture, where he's laying his hand on the chest of the ocean, or not the chest, rather the head of the ocean with its flowing mane. Mane is usually the hair which you see around the head of the lion, that is usually called as the mane. So it's referring to the mane as that white sea waves rising, which are like the mane of, or a beard, long beard or long hair of the sea, the old sea. And the point is that it is more about a kind of that parent-child relationship which he finds there with the ocean, recalling his youthful days, and feeling the same kind of attachment with the ocean. And moving on to the next stanza, we find that his journey is in effect is over. So now he's talking about what he's gained out of that journey. My task is done. My song has ceased. My theme has died into an echo. It is fit the spell should break of this protracted dream. So all of this is kind of a dream in a sense. Now he's coming back to his real-time poetic self out of the pilgrimage, okay, which he has undertaken, or which Childe Harold has undertaken, or the poet has made Childe Harold the character undertake. The torch shall be extinguished which hath lit my midnight lamp. Typical idea that the candle which the poet is using as light has now burnt enough, it's coming to an end, and so would the poem come to an end. Okay. The torch shall be extinguished which hath lit my midnight lamp, and what is writ is writ. What is written is written. Now it's a very, it's a kind of a persona of the careless writer, or the a writer who has written without any revision, without any editing, or without any apologies of having written something he should not have written. So it is, of course, I mean, it's very hard to really assess whether Byron is being honest or not, or it is part of the persona that he's creating about the poet, that who is too philosophical and honest for this entire theatrical act of editing and putting out. Why theatrical? Because it's a kind of a performance. Writing is a performance. So he's saying whatever is writ is writ. Whatever I have written is written. Okay, you're not going to change it. Would it be worthier? He's wish it was worthier what I have written. But I am not now that which I have been. Okay, a very interesting way to, in a sense, give a pat on your own back as the poet, in a sense saying that after having written this poem about Childe Harold's pilgrimage, I am not now that which I have been. He has changed. He has also undertaken the journey. Okay. Also Childe Harold, who would have, in a sense, if Childe Harold is writing his pilgrimage in the first person, he is changed by the end of the journey. Okay, but it's a lot more self-referential than talking about Childe Harold per se. So he says that, and my visions flit less palpably before me. So visions is whatever he's seeing in front of him, which he was writing about before. They are becoming more and more vague and not as clear. They are fading in front of his eyes, and the glow which in my spirit dwelt is fluttering. The inspiration, the light which was there in his spirit, is now fluttering. Basically coming to the end of the poem, almost speaking in the imagery of the candle, the lamp by which he is writing. Fluttering, faint and low. Okay, the important point is, look at the effect of the act of writing a poem, of undertaking this imaginative, meditative pilgrimage full of adventure, etc., realizations, which the poet has had on himself. Okay, that he is not the same as he was before writing this poem. So that's a journey. Okay, a typical feature of that long romantic poem, which is there in other romantic poets as well. Farewell, a word that must be and hath been, a sound which makes us linger. This reminds me of that now famous scene where Irfan Khan talks about how we do not know to say goodbye at the end of our journeys, and wishing we would know better. So yeah, this is what he's saying. Farewell, a word that must be and has been, a sound which makes us linger. The word farewell, in a sense, feels like saying a little longer, it's time to part ways. Yet farewell. Ye who have traced the pilgrim to the scene which is his last. Okay. Ye, that is the reader, you who have traced the pilgrim to the scene which is his last, who have travelled along. Okay, also tracing is kind, you read with your finger, tracing the words on the page, and also tracing, in a sense, following the pilgrim to the last scene. If in your memories dwell a thought which once was his, if on you swell a single recollection, not in vain. Okay, what he's saying is that if after having been on this journey the reader also becomes a pilgrim on the part of, or in the exercise of reading this narrative about the pilgrimage of Childe Harold. Okay, because you are also undertaking a journey, and he's saying that the pilgrim has learned something. I have learned something. He said it in the previous stanza. Now he's talking about the reader. If in your memory there remains a single thought which was his, the pilgrim's, Childe Harold's, and if on you a single recollection swells or grows, in a way you cause you to reflect about it. Not in vain he wore his sandal shoe and scallop shell. Now these are images from seafaring, sailoring. Okay. This journey has not been undertaken in vain by the pilgrim Childe Harold. Farewell, and that is undertaken in vain by Childe Harold if you have also stored some of his experience in your memory as reader. So there is an exchange of sympathy on that level as well. Farewell, with him alone may rest the pain. That is with Childe Harold the pilgrim. If such were there, so if there was any pain of the journey, the difficulty, the trouble, whichever come along the way, the obstacles, the pain caused by it, if it was there, experienced by the pilgrim, let it stay with him, with you, the reader, the moral of his strain. Okay, farewell, with him alone may rest the pain, if such were there in the first place. With you, the reader, should remain the moral of his strain, the moral of his song. Okay, so you should also, in a sense, learn something from this pilgrimage. So who is this pilgrimage for? Childe Harold, the poet, and the reader, all three, and by extension humanity at large. About what? About all that we have talked about, the limitations of human ventures, the limits of human time, wars, empires, in the face of permanence, the permanent changes of nature. So human endeavor to mark permanent boundaries, have permanent empires, permanent religions, ideas of God, of whatever. A lot of it is there in the previous Canto as well. Okay, the men who make men fool, that stanza, keep that in mind. All of these endeavors, in a sense, are in vain. Why? Because they are striving for something which is beyond the human capacities. That is permanence. That is the final word, the final marking of boundaries, the final moral, ethical, religious norms which human beings think that they're setting for everybody, but actually are there for the interest of their own sect, tribe, community, nationality, and all of this seems trivial when compared to the ever changing, the ever evolving, permanent facets of or bodies of nature. Okay, so with this we come to the end of Byron. I hope you liked these cantos, and they are pretty easy to read, more straightforward than some of the other intellectual ideas which were quite complex when there in Shelley and others, Coleridge. History is one subject which is very, very crucial to Byron. Keep that in mind. And it's how human beings see history. Human beings feel that they're making history every day. All great leaders, all empires feel that way, and he's showing this through these poems that that's probably a little too far-fetched on the part of human beings to think that they have made a permanent place for their own identity in annals of history, because time, in a sense, would erase everything, and what would remain would be the permanence of nature. Okay, so thank you very much, and now we would meet in a couple of days with our last poet in the syllabus, Robert Burns. I kept it for the last because he's a Scottish poet, so there would be something about the the Scottish bard, Scottish nationalism, and Scottish romanticism. So it's slightly different, but in given before Wordsworth, so it's in that kind of a vein. So read these poems. Also try to read the next poet, Robert Burns, and I'll meet you shortly in a couple of days. Thank you and take care.